Hey y'all, what's up? All right, so I want to talk about boundaries, and I want to go a lot deeper than many of the videos you probably will hear on social media online. But when I think about boundaries, I think that boundaries really are so underrated. Like people don't really uh, think about putting boundaries in place in their life, period, or even in relationships. And so when you talk about I want to really kind of address romantic relationships in this particular video, but boundaries take place in the home. Non-romantic relationships, they take place on the job, they take place on in the supermarket, when you go shopping, everywhere you go, there are boundaries. Boundaries ultimately determine how people you'll allow people to treat you, and that keeps you centered. And when I say centered, I'll do a video on this separately, but centered being you're in that center place of peace. So think of a circle in the middle of your soul, and you're standing in the center of that circle. That's the peace spot. That's where everything is vibing. The universe is working for you, in your behavior, on your behalf, and everything's just going your way. But when something happens to knock you back and shift you emotionally, mentally, spiritually, or what have you, someone makes you upset, whatever the case may be, then you sort of start to fall out of that circle. You're moving off your center, and that's where things start to shake, and you have to find your way back in that ground place, that center. You're rooted there. And so if you don't have boundaries, right, a lot of folks are going to cross your boundaries. First off, people can't respect what they can't see. Just as if I don't have a fence around my home, then people don't know to stay off my lawn or respect my private place. A lot of times people just kind of go through your stuff. So you got to have boundaries to ensure that you're centered. Now, here's what's interesting about boundaries when it comes to romantic relationships, particularly, is a lot of times you can have boundaries. Let's say you have a boundary, whatever that may. You may say, all right, I have a boundary where I will not let a person yell at me. I will not let a person physically abuse me. I will not let a person curse me out or say something mentally or that strains me and makes me feel stressful. I will not tolerate a person coming in late at night if you are living together. Whatever your boundary is, that's your boundary. Now, a lot of times we can have boundaries in place, but what will happen is when we meet that person we love, maybe fell in love with, or we desire to be with, and we want to go further with, perhaps that person, a lot of times they're not healed enough to respect your boundaries, right? Woo! Man, that's good. So you got to factor that into the equation. So let's just say, hey, look, I may say, all right, I may say pornography is a trigger for me. I'm just throwing something out there. Maybe you think that alcohol is a trigger for you. Well, if I enter into a relationship where someone is, let's just say they are addicted to pornography or they are addicted to sex, and I may say, well, if you're willing to be in a relationship with me, I don't, it's not going to be a healthy situation for me to be connected with someone who may be addicted to alcohol or pornography, because that's a trigger for me because of some things that I went through in my prior relationships, or even in my past life, or even maybe as a child, right? Now, here's the thing. If that person hasn't healed themselves, then they're not going to be able to respect your boundaries, right? So they may say, oh, well, I'm addicted to pornography or sex, but I'm not a cheater, right? I'm not going to go out with anybody else, and I won't do that stuff because I'm with you, and we'll do everything together. And that's great. Or maybe they say, oh, well, yeah, I used to be an alcoholic, but I don't drink anymore, and I don't take it to that level when I'm drunk, so I'm good. But then they may have some type of emotional trigger in their life that drives them to drink, or drives them to go out and be sexually promiscuous, or break the covenant of the relationship because of their wounds, right? I've been in relationships where I would say one of my key boundaries is I don't want to be yelled at. I don't care who you are. Don't yell at me. Excuse me. don't verbally disrespect me and let's have a conversation here. But if the person, I've been with people who they would either yell at me or say mean things to me, not because they hate me or think I'm a bad person, but because they are still dealing with some emotional issues themselves that pushes them to that point. That doesn't excuse it, doesn't condone it. But however, there have been some great people that I've come across who have admitted that the root of some of the issues or behaviors that they were exemplifying in the relationship was because of past trauma or childhood trauma or whatever the case may be. Now, here's where things get a little difficult for a lot of people. At the end of the day, it's up to us to determine, are we at a position in our life where we want to yoke up or connect with someone who is they're at a point to where they're going to cross certain boundaries? Can you handle that? Can you be with that type of person at this point in your life? Is that going to be healthy for you? Now, just because someone is wounded or still hurting, and maybe they will cross your boundaries here and there, but you know deep down in your heart, when you look in the mirror, how well you're going to do when someone is going to cross your boundaries continually until they grow and learn not to cross your boundaries, right? It takes time for people to heal and not cross your boundaries anymore. When someone recognizes that they are still broken and still wounded, and that brokenness is going to lead them or make them a likely case scenario to cross your boundary, you've got to factor how that's going to affect you in your life. Do you feel you can overcome that and easily forgive and move on and is that person a person that is likely to heal anytime soon? Do you see progress, the potential for progress for them to overcome the emotional barriers in their life that has attributed or contributed to those hurtful behaviors that they're exemplifying? Only you can really answer that question at the end of the day. Now, another aspect really quickly I want to talk about when it comes to boundaries is a lot of times you will get people, when you start to express your boundaries, you'll get pushback. People will say, oh, well, why are you trying to set boundaries for? You act like you too good for me. So people will try to peg you as someone that's being Mr. or Mrs. Goody Two Shoes. Have you ever heard that saying? Like, oh, well, you don't love me well enough. If you really love me, you would love me despite my pain and trauma and despite my shortcoming and flaws. And so they put that on you. And I find it very interesting that the people who want you to be patient with their issues, right, aren't going to be very patient with your issues. Woo, man, that's good. You got to rewind that one. Okay, so I found that at the end of the day, you've got to do what's best for you and your boundaries, and you have those boundaries set. And you also, as an individual, have to assess and evaluate whether or not you have healthy boundaries in place. Because if you don't, and people are running over you and you don't even have any boundaries, well, the question now becomes why? Additionally, if you do have boundaries in place and you say, hey, this is what I'm willing to accept or not willing to accept, but you continue to attract people who cross those boundaries, well, we got two issues. Why is the universe continuing to bring you people who are crossing those boundaries? That's another video. But the other issue is, what's the reason behind the inability for you to be faithful and loyal to the very boundaries that you set up? Do you find it too difficult to tell people, no, I can no longer accept that behavior? Are you just too nice? You know, what is it? We got to talk about that, because that can be something that is attached to something that you may be dealing with as well. Okay, all right. So I just wanted to put that out there and kind of really address boundaries. I'll be, excuse me, just came out for a walk, excuse me. But I'll be talking about boundaries and a lot more, how boundaries affect our intimacy and our sexual relationships, how they affect our family and all that type of stuff. So if you really enjoyed this, think it's a really good, informative video, hey, feel free to share it with somebody and stay tuned. There'll definitely be more to come.